This is John Milner interviewing Donald N. Pitts on April the 28th. The interview takes place in Los Angeles. Donald, you spent a part of your childhood living in the McKinley Home for Boys. Could you tell me where that was located at that time?
Located out in the San Fernando Valley in the area which is now Sherman Oaks. In fact, it was on the property which is now Bullock's Fashion Square, 250 acres adjacent right up to the Los Angeles River on Riverside Drive.
Yes, and can you describe a little how McKinley looked, the types of buildings?
Yeah, it was spread out obviously on such large acreage, but it had very large, solid, 1 foot thick cement wall type of construction of first of big administration building, which included the dining room and the offices and the social workers' offices. It included 4 major, what they called cottages, which were actually big, huge 2-story cement buildings which housed 36 kids on the lower and the upper level. So you've got about 70 kids in 4 cottages. It shows you've got about 250 kids roughly in McKinley Home at the time.
Much like an army barracks.
Well, indestructible in the way it was constructed. Open dormitories, 15, 18 kids sleeping in a dormitory, open rows of lockers in the hallways, community showers, community bathrooms. Yeah, it was a lot like a military operation in the sense of the facilities and the institutional feelings.
So you never had much privacy?
No, there wasn't any real privacy. There was a slough down a ways that was, I guess, in the edge of the grounds of McKinley Home, which was kind of a jungle, and the kids used to go down there and form little huts or clubs and things, and I guess in a way it was a way of getting some privacy, but in general there was no privacy.
Can you remember the name of the man who was the director or the head of McKinley Home at that time?
When I came in, my brother and I came in 1934. The superintendent's name was Shaw. I do not remember his first name, but the kids always referred to him as Beer Gut Shaw.
It's Beer Gut?
Beer Gut. He was a drinker, and sometimes he got intoxicated, on some evening, let's say, and he and his wife lived in the administration building, and they had a balcony up there from there where they lived, and he'd come out there, and it was, when I look back, rather, I guess, to say the least, embarrassing to think that the superintendent of this place was drunk and yelling at the kids, and they're throwing things at him, or calling him Beer Gut Shaw. But that was the superintendent when I went in there.
And how long did he last while you were there?
Just a couple of, it seemed to me like a couple of years, and he was replaced by Dr. Earl C. McGinnis that had come in from the school system, I believe, of Wisconsin. Totally different type of a person. Brought his family.
You want to describe him a little?
He was very efficient, very enthusiastic, very, I'd say, demanding, I think, on the staff and getting them organized and having staff meetings. He was a good man in terms of getting the community to know and understand McKinley Home and the relationship with the Kiwanis Club for support. And he was a very, very strong leader, if you will. And he did seem to appreciate the situation the kids were in, though he himself wasn't what you would call a personal counselor type of an individual, but he took an interest in kids and trying to give them advice and guidance, particularly as they were leaving and going out.
And he had a family?
Yeah, he had his wife, and he had a daughter and 3 boys that all arrived with him. And one of the things he did, which I respect him for really, he insisted as a part of the deal of coming that they build a separate residence, a house, a normal home toward the side where he and his family could live on the grounds of McKinley Home, and not up there in the administration building, so to speak, which I think would have been impossible with a family of 4 kids anyway.
Sure. And he turned out to be a very good superintendent, you felt?
I felt, yes, I felt he was a very good superintendent. He did a lot for the home, both in terms of improving its facilities as well as getting support from many different sources.
And you became a personal friend of his children, didn't you?
Well, I became a personal friend of the youngest, who was approximately my age. We were in the same grade in school, and he had his son go to school with McKinley Home boys, which created great problems for the son, because he was ridiculed and whatnot as being the prince, so to speak, and looked upon as somebody special because he wasn't really one of us, and yet he was in school with us all through grammar school. And so we grew up together from about 3rd grade in high school. So yeah, we became very, very close friends.
And you still see one of the daughters?
Yes, the next youngest child was Joanne, and Joanne has also talked about the extreme, if you will, problems that she had as a girl growing up, living in McKinley Home for boys, 250 boys, and really not being in what would have been a natural residential area, and some of the problems that she found that created for her. I had another son. He became a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon, and the oldest son was a missionary in China, speaks Chinese, and spent many years with
Yes.
specialist in that area.
Can you recall any of the other staff members who particularly influenced your life?
Well, Karl Klinger was the assistant superintendent, a big German. He was the iron hand. He was the disciplinarian. If there was anybody to hold the place together, he was, in terms of discipline, when you've got 250 kids running around, he was the source of that, if you will, authority and control. And so the matrons, if they had difficulties with you of any kind, would eventually say, well, I'm taking you to see Klinger, or you've got to go see Klinger, and that was the way the matrons had of getting you into conformance, or, if necessary, having you disciplined, which included occasionally him having to slap you across the rear or across the face, because some of the times they got very belligerent.
So there was corporal punishment in the agency at that time?
Yes, but only, I'd say almost only by Carl Klinger, who was assistant superintendent, and he did it discriminately. He wasn't just batting kids around, but he did at times feel it was necessary, I guess, in certain extreme cases to handle a kid that way. My matron, Miss Buck, in the youngest cottage, carried around one of these wooden paddles that they used to have balls tied to, and she'd carry around a paddle and hit us with it, but it was sting, but it was more a way of like you're corralling sheep or something. And she's trying to get 36 little kids all to go take their shower at night, and sometimes she'd have to give maybe a little whack on the arm or the fanny to get them moving or get their attention, or to keep control, because one matron for 35, 36 kids required something, because sometimes they would be challenged by the kids.
Okay. So you just had one matron in charge of 35 children. Was she there 8 hours a day or 24 hours a day? Or how long?
24 hours a day.
She was on duty full time? Full time. How many days a week?
I believe she got off, if I'm not mistaken, 1 day every 2 weeks.
1 day of leave every 2 weeks.
And a substitute matron would come in.
I see.
The dormitory, or what they call the cottage, that I started in, or all the same, the Founders Cottage, consisted of 2 large dormitories, 18 beds in each dormitory, meaning it could handle 36 kids. The matron's room was in the center between the 2 dormitories, and she could therefore have access out to either dormitory, but that was her life, 24 hours a day.
And where did she sleep?
There, in that room in between our 2 dormitories.
She had one room between.
Right, and she ate with us. She, cleaning up the cottages and the beds and the floors and the washrooms, getting us to learn how to get dressed and how to, get ready for school. I'm talking about kids that were 6, 7, 8 at that time. Totally worrying about it and mending our clothes, getting our clothes into the laundry, getting them sorted out, teaching us how to make beds. It's amazing how a human being could endure too long with such a...
Yes.
Not to mention the challenge and the stresses of all these kids, a lot of which were emotionally upset.
Can you remember her name?
Yes, her name is Josephine Buck.
Josephine Buck.
And she was a very fine woman, and a very well-groomed woman. She spoke well. She was a Christian Scientist. I knew that because she got my mother interested in taking my brother Ralph to a Christian Science practitioner to see if it might help him with his extreme asthma problems. But she was a firm disciplinarian, but I think I have to say a fine woman. She was very fair. She used food and candy as a way to show, that we were doing well, or that we had behaved properly, and withdrawal of candy and things if we had not behaved. She said prayers every night and every morning before we, all got up and went to bed. She was a very conscientious, very hardworking woman.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that there was a social service office. Could you tell me about the social workers?
I never knew for years there was a social workers office, or that there were social workers. Maybe I was too young to tune in, but there were only 2 social workers that were in the administration building, and they were quite heavily involved, of course, in helping to screen and determine admissions in the McKinley Home, which obviously had to be limited because there's only so much in the way of facilities and staff. I don't recall having any contact with them at all in my growing up years. I was aware of them, but I was never quite sure what they did, and I think they tended to have to focus on what I'd call more serious problems or upset children. And with 2 people, and 250 kids, you couldn't expect them to be covering all the bases.
Yes. Do you know whether or not there were trained social workers or had degrees in social work?
I don't know whether they did or not.
Yes.
I had the impression that the younger social worker, Miss St. John, everybody liked her. I had the impression she was educated, trained, but as a social worker per se, I don't know.
Yes.
She seemed to
That was
give me that impression.
Miss St. John. Huh?
Miss St. John.
Can you remember the name of the other one?
I believe her name was Miss Weiss.
Miss White.
Weiss, W-E-I-S-S.
Weiss, uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but much more reserved and harder to reach, so to speak. But Miss St. John was out there. She communicated with and talked with and mixed with the kids, and she was a very delightful person
Yes.
to have around.
Did the agency do much work with the parents in relation to parents?
No, I think really not. A very, very, must have been a very limited extent because of the limited resources. I, in my case, only know that occasionally, I guess, talk to my mom on the phone if she called about something which would be rare. And the other time was when the home arranged for my brother and me to meet our father out at a work camp where he was stationed because he had been arrested for not providing child support or something of that sort. And they took us out to see him. I never understood what that was all about, why, or it was a most traumatic experience. But they did arrange for us to see our father at one time at his request.
Mm-hmm.
I think he made quite a strong plea that they came to see us.
Who sponsored the agency? Was it?
The Community Chest.
It was a community chest agency?
Community Chest Agency.
Was there any men's organization that was key sponsor?
Well, the Kiwanis Club was, and probably still is, the Kiwanis Club focused on supporting primarily athletic facilities and equipment and activities, building a tennis court, handball courts, football uniforms. They set up the camp up, arranged the camp up at Big Pines Camp Mickeywanis, which was a combination of McKinley and Kiwanis as a name. So they looked at the kind of the recreational side and tried to, and did a damn good job of providing excellent courts and equipment and things for us. Excellent job. And they came out once a month and visited and had a sort of an dinner in the dining hall with the kids, and then they'd have some kind of an entertainment program up in the auditorium, which was all sorts of mixture of things, from the Megalyn Kiddies to some boring films that we didn't understand.
You mentioned the Mickeywanis camp. Did you go there as a kid yourself?
Yeah, every kid went there. Each cottage had its turn during the summer when it would go up to the camp for 10 days. I started working up there as a counselor when Dr. McGuinness made the decision, I guess, to have kids that achieved Eagle Scout status, which he strongly supported the whole scouting program, to become counselors at the camp as a form of recognition and as a way of having them feel not only that they achieved, but further that they might develop from that. So.
And you were an Eagle Scout?
Yes, I became an Eagle Scout at the McKinley Home Boy Scout troop. Yeah, as did my friends Charles and Dana and Jerry and so forth. And so one time we were all counselors at the camp.
Yes. How old were you when you were a counselor?
I was a little, 1 year younger than the rest. I was a little fuzzy, but I believe I was, say, 16.
About 16 years old,
Yeah.
And who headed that camp as camp director?
The camp director was originally a fellow named Lyle Smith, a very fine, outstanding teacher from the grammar school that really got the camp organized and set up. And it was an outdoor camp in the sense you slept outdoors. There wasn't a bunch of big buildings. They had a place for the kitchen and a recreation hall where the director and certain equipment were kept, but basically the camp was outdoors. And I worked up there as a counselor, and then I worked the next year whenever my buddies went into the Navy. I was too young. I got out of high school before I was old enough to go in the Navy. They asked me to be the program director of the camp, and so I worked up there as the program director.
You actually worked there at least 2 summers.
3.
Three summers.
I also was asked to, when I got out of the Navy, I was only in the Navy a year and a half or so. When I got out, they had written me and asked me if I would come back when I got out that summer and be the assistant director of the camp, which I did. So I worked at that camp 3 years.
Yes. Was that with the same director you had before?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No, he had passed away, and they had to pull in somebody else. It was a little bit of a problem.
Yes. You mentioned that Mr. Smith was from the grade school. Was that located on the campus of McKinley Home?
For all intents and purposes, it was, but it was a public grammar school in the public school system, and built on property adjacent to the borderline of McKinley Home. And so it was just like being a part of the McKinley Home facilities. Though it was a public school, people in the area recognized it as McKinley Home focus, and they did not send their children. No other children didn't go there. So it's the same kids.
Yes.
It's McKinley Home or grammar school.
Can you remember the name of the school?
Yeah, McKinley Home Grammar School.
It was called McKinley Home Grammar School.
On the corner of Riverside Drive and Woodman Avenue.
Uh-huh.
Delightful school, and the facility and the grounds and the way it was run. And it had a principal, Louis B. Hoffman, who was a fine, I thought a fine principal, and he brought into focus things that maybe other schools didn't at that time, but he brought into the school classes and focus on nature and the different areas of the country and the fauna and flora and naturalism, and he taught us a whole lot about what you may call nature study, and actually would give examinations and tests to keep us focused. And
yes.
It was very, very, very good part of the program.
And, did that also serve the kids as a high school?
No, the grammar school went up through the 8th grade, and then when you graduated from the 8th grade, you went to Van Nuys High School, and the high school bus, yellow bus, would come in to the McKinley Home grounds and pick us up and take us to Van Nuys High School. So for 9th through the 12th grades, that's where you went to school.
Mm-hmm. So the high school was a public.
It was truly public,
mm-hmm.
A very public, big, coeducational and so forth, and quite intimidating, if you will, to go from this environment in McKinley Home for 8 years, where you slept 8, went to school and everything, and then into this public school, which truly was a public school, was quite I felt quite out of place, like a misfit. I think a lot of kids did. But a lot of kids also did very well.
Yeah. Was there a lot of emphasis on sports in McKinley?
Yes. That was probably the main outlet, if you will, for all types of our energy. There was just much encouragement to participate in sports. There were plenty of facilities. There were no demands that said you must be on a football team or something, but the kids all just got into, whether they were organized teams that they were practicing with or training for, or just playing together on the grass, touch football or handball or whatnot. There was just a natural, the kids just were attracted to anything outdoors. It was all the space and place for running, skateboard scooters or a bicycle if you're lucky to have one, and handball courts and running here and there, just wide open spaces for plenty of outdoor sports. And indeed, it became a focus. Kids that were particularly good athletically, I think, did tend to get respect and looked upon and popular by the other kids.
By the other kids. Mm-hmm. And did they do some gardening or farming on that 250 acres? Yeah,
they had their own farm. In fact, at the time I went in 1934, it was called, the McKinley Home, the McKinley Industrial Home for Boys. The word industrial was in there, and it conveyed that the home was self-sufficient and totally operated by growing all its own produce, having its own cows, and the kids all working and doing things to be self-sufficient. It raised beef cattle, it had its own print shop, its own laundry to do the laundry. Everything was, it was a sort of a self-contained little community. And it faded away from that with time, but we all had jobs, and that included working maybe in the pulling up carrots or milking cows or working in the hospital or helping and cooking the kitchen. Everybody had jobs of some kind, as well as jobs that had to do with maintaining the cottage you lived in.
It was truly an industrial school then. And about how many hours a day or a week would you put in as a child working in the industry?
Oh, gee. That, of course, depended on your job, but I had worked at the hospital for some years. I would guess we were working down there at least 3-4 hours a day. I'd be down there to help get the breakfast ready and cleaned up, and then go to school, come back for lunch, and handle that, and come back and handle the dinner.
What time would you get up in the morning as get the kids up?
The kids all got up at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
The guys that worked at the barn to do the milking, of course, got up much earlier.
Yes. Yes.
They were the barn crew, and they were a unique group in themselves. But the whistle would go off and wake up everybody in the San Fernando Valley, the steam whistle, at 6 o'clock. And that's when we get up.
And what time would you go to bed at night?
Depending upon your age and what cottage you were in. The oldest kids in the high school cottages went to bed at 9. The lights were out at 9. And then it'd be earlier than that, depending on
the younger children. You really put in long hours.
Well, I don't know. 6 to 9 is probably more or less normal. They would allow you, if you were in high school, to stay up at the library, of course, in the cottages, to stay up to do homework until the lights would be on in there. But in terms of, in general, going to bed and turning the lights out in the dormitories where you slept at 9 o'clock, but sometimes there were kids that did stay up and do homework.
When you were in high school, were you encouraged to do the things that other kids from outside did in high school, like participate in the activities like drama or music or sports at that school?
No, there wasn't, no, one way or the other. There wasn't, I don't recall any encouragement in that direction.
Yes, were you allowed to?
Oh, yes, we could have been gone to a drama class or signed up for Glee Club, which some of us did. We go to the Glee Club and go after sports, yes. And the kids went out for sports at Van Nuys High and did very well.
Could you go social things in the evening, like have a date?
Yeah. Yeah, that was... not that it was so easy to arrange. It wasn't like going to see the girl across the street or something, because McKinley Home was sitting there off, this big place. But, kids had dates, and they might get permission or not get permission and hitchhike in to go see their girlfriend.
Yes.
Or to go to some school gathering and so forth. We hitchhiked around a lot. both with or without permission. We got older, we realized that's how we could get about. Hitchhike into Hollywood is a big deal to see a movie. Something like that.
I see. Did you take many trips as a group to the beach or the mountains and so forth?
Yes, lots of trips. Lots of interesting trips of all kinds to the beach. I took a group of us scouts that had, I forget whether again it was those that were, further along in terms of progress as the scouts, took us to see the World's Fair up in
San Francisco.
Took us up to a snow trip up to Mickey Wanis in the winter to, play in the snow. Get free tickets to go see the Ramona play or to see some show. People were always contributing tickets of some kind or another. Obviously to football games at the Coliseum and that sort of thing.
I think you donated a photograph to the archives of a bus that was given to you by some celebrity.
Yeah, that was a beautiful, beautiful, luxurious bus donated by Wallace Beery.
Wallace Beery, the old movie star.
Yeah. He had that built for a special vacation he had planned to take, and it was really very luxurious at that time with certain kind of folding seats and so forth. Was not able to take the trip for some reason, perhaps health, and he donated that bus, new form, dark navy blue bus, to McKinley Home. And I remember the day that they had this gathering. Wallace Beery was there, and my friend Chuck Saunders was the elected, the student body president, and Dr. McGuinness, the superintendent, and they had this big gathering and ceremony where he presented the bus to McKinley Home. Yeah, it was the way things occurred is through donations a lot.
Yes. Can you remember about what year that was?
Well, that probably was about 38 or maybe 40.
38 or 40,
Something like that. Yeah. We had a couple of real old buses. I don't know who donated those. Those things were they're out of the war or something. I mean, they were really old, but they needed buses, big things to haul all these kids around. And we called them the Fage. I don't know why we called them that. It must have had something to do with their name, but all the windows there were no windows in them. The windows were all broken out. And as we got older and started going to the high school instead of, just being in the grammar school and isolated, and started getting exposed to the outside world of going to the high school, if we had to go in that bus, let's say, to school or to a movie, a lot of us would climb and get down on the floor so we wouldn't be seen because it was such a ghastly looking vehicle. We were
ashamed to ride in it.
Yeah, we were becoming sensitive to the outside world.
Were you youngsters from McKinley allowed to go home on holidays or for weekends?
Yes, certainly they were. They would go home usually for holidays, like over some days over Christmas or over Easter, or I don't recall that it would just be for a weekend. That might not be the case, but it would be where there was a break, a little school break in connection with holidays. Once in a while, a parent or relative might drive out to visit you in McKinley Home.
Mm-hmm. What were most of the kids sent to McKinley Home for? What reason for the placement?
They were called, not that what they were called doesn't answer the question necessarily. They were called underprivileged kids, which were kids that had been abandoned, or kids whose parents had both disappeared, or who were both alcoholic, or who had died in an accident, or who were emotionally disturbed, or there was just one parent quite often, another parent having died or disappeared or been drunk or whatever in prison, and the one parent unable to cope with raising the kid and trying to earn a family, economically, if you will, deprived. So they were kids that lacked an adequate, if any, home setting.
Yes. Were there any orphaned children in the home?
I would guess so. We never talked about this stuff. It's strange among us. We never talked with each other about, well, what parents or family of you and all this sort of thing.
No.
But I think there were some orphans among them, yes.
Did you ever know of any youngster being adopted from the home, placed by another agency, but living in that home?
I have the impression that some kids came from other institutions or homes for different reasons. Sometimes because they felt they would do better in this McKinley Home environment. But maybe sometimes the kid was removed and placed from McKinley to Junior Republic for the other reason that he wasn't doing well or whatnot at McKinley and needed a more severe environment.
Yeah. Junior Republic was another agency in the community, another boys' school.
Yes, but it was sort of a step away from going to jail, if you will.
Yes, it was more for delinquent kids.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a distinction between the two agencies.
Yeah, McKinley wasn't basically for delinquents, though it's pretty hard to draw these arbitrary lines and say this one is and this one isn't delinquent. Sometimes there's a little dabbling, you might say.
You mean you're a bad boy part-time?
Yeah. Or you are doing mischievous things that some might consider inappropriate part of the time, but you're not necessarily behaving basically as what I would consider a true delinquent.
Mm-hmm.
I might have stolen an ice cream bar out of a store here or some candy there or whatever, let's say, occasionally as all the other kids did. I'm not a delinquent and wasn't a delinquent.
No. After you got out of the Navy, didn't you work in another camp program?
Yes. Camp McStrauss up in the outer edges of Los Angeles here, sponsored by the Jewish Big Brothers Agency. I worked there for all the time I was in college. I worked summers and Christmas vacations and Easter vacations. They would have kids up there. I should explain that it was not a Jewish restricted camp. I mention that because that's of the sponsorship by Jewish Big Brothers. It was mixed in races, blacks and Spanish and so forth. And the kids were all under the care, I believe psychiatric care, throughout the year in their own places where they lived, and they would come to this camp in the summer and Christmas and Easter and so forth for breaks. But they were more emotionally disturbed kids that were focused on in a very constructed, organized way for their emotional situations.
And where was that camp located?
I can't think of the name. Verdugo? Around Verdugo.
Verdugo Road in
Yes.
Glendale area.
Yes, Verdugo Road.
A little north of Glendale.
Yes. Big camp, again, very big camp. And I did very well there, incidentally, in the sense that Milt Goldberg, who headed up Jewish Big Brothers, had, I guess, wanted me to work there. I forget exactly how we became acquainted, but I'd become quite known, you might say, because of my years at McKinley Home camp, Nikiwanis, and through these association gatherings they'd have each year with camp counselors and whatnot. You got some interface. Anyway, they had different levels of counselors, and I knew, I became aware that I had some good experience at McKinley Home, and I wasn't going to start at the bottom. And so I didn't go to work for them the first year. They offered me a job because they insisted that I start at the bottom. But the next year they came around and said, okay, you can start at a higher level. And indeed, I became aware that I had quite a...
You were saying that you were aware of the experience you'd had and how this would apply to your job at Camp Max Strauss.
I was very perceptive and unusually effective in dealing with some of the children, including emotionally upset kids. Surprisingly so. I developed my own techniques for, we had to write reports for the caseworkers, in which I used circles of different sizes to convey relationships of kids to each other and to me and so forth. And I recall how the social work staff found this quite interesting, and I had just devised it as an idea, but what really I think is worth mentioning is after I worked there during college, when I graduated from college, from Pomona College, I was offered the job of being the camp director for Camp Max Strauss. I declined the job. I think I basically felt I was really not mature enough yet to take on such a responsibility. And I hadn't really thought about that as being my field of vocation. Well, I had thought about social work versus business, so to speak, and had more or less in my mind that I was going the other way. But I remember how surprised I was that I was offered the job of running this camp that involved a number of children and a lot of responsibility.
It really was at that point where you thought possibility of being a social worker?
Oh, it made me have to think it through, because there was a specific job offer with some real responsibility. The camp must have had 150 or more at each time, group, but the fact that they were working in conjunction with social workers and caseworkers, and that it was interracial also, I think probably the first maybe in this whole area, was a very significant opportunity, and it caused me to come to grips with social work as you might say, a natural course of vocation for me to follow. I could see that, sensed that there was something that I had as skills, but I, at the same time, wanted to turn to the economic side where I could be sure I made enough money that I would never be in the predicament that my mother and father had been in when I was little, and I was very, very much dominated by this, I shall never be in need, I shall never be without, and I will pursue that.
Send you to be in the business world or industrial world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because of that, you've always maintained an interest in human services along with your work in the industrial world. And I know you had 2 or 3 jobs. We won't discuss those because they were brief in business. But then you went with a very large corporation, TRW.
Yeah. Well, it's worth mentioning that I was first, though, that I was joined the Foreign Service.
Oh yes, you must leave that out.
For 3 years or so, over in the embassy in Warsaw and the consulate in Stuttgart, Germany, and it was a great experience. That's what I had wanted to do and had been waiting to hopefully somehow get into the Foreign Service, and a bug of travel, I think, has always been with me. Incidentally, while I was waiting to hopefully hear from the Foreign Service after I graduated from Pomona College, I worked for the neighborhood settlement. I can't recall the full name, but it was a neighborhood settlement activity that was headed up by Peg Mudgett in Los Angeles.
Yes.
For several months.
Peg Mudgett still lives here.
She does. Yes, she, the experience probably was as much of a value to me as it was to the kids that we were helping, because I was hanging out of nowhere. I had gotten out of college. My mom was, the house that she had been, was gone. I was floating and trying to figure out what to do and how to survive, and I did that neighborhood settlement job, and I remember doing it well while I was sort of waiting, and then I did get an appointment with the Foreign Service.
Yes. What was your specific job in the settlement house?
It was literally talking with, and I sort of felt like I was relating to the kids almost as one of them, because my age didn't seem that much difference, but to try to motivate and encourage them to focus on some constructive activities of what they might do with their time and so forth.
Form of peer counseling.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They tend to relate to me easier than maybe someone that was much older, and maybe tend to also, I probably shared with them that where I had just grown up too. Yeah. And that, McKinley Home was a certain kind of a place, and you can still do something with yourself and your life and that sort of thing, and ideas of what they might do, and just the bull sessions.
Can you describe the settlement? Where was it located? And
I don't really remember, except it was in Los Angeles, and it seems to me it might have been somewhere around Olympic Boulevard. I don't really remember. It's fuzzy, and it was kind of a nice little comfortable but small place that consisted primarily of rooms and furniture that made it comfortable to sit around and have conversation, and groups of small group meetings and things of that sort.
Were the other kind of activities? Did they have a gym or any place?
No.
Were there any sports conducted then?
No.
Not at all.
No. So much for the neighborhood settlement.
Yes.
Yeah. And even in the Foreign Service, I got tapped for a little special assignment while I was in Poland because of a young kid a street kid that came in and wanted and demanded refuge from the American embassy because he felt maybe he was an American. Maybe he was, 15, 14 years old or something, but he was a problem in that nobody knew what he was or what he was up to, and he was a delinquent of sorts, and lived by stealing, and had followed and been with the soldiers during the Second World War. And anyway, the embassy said somebody's got to cope with this kid until we figure out what to do and what his facts are. And so I got that assignment of supervising him, if you will, and again found that I was very effective and able to reach him and communicate with him, whereas most of the others just couldn't and didn't seem to know how to reach him, and gained his certain amount of confidence and cooperation from him, helping him to keep from upsetting the entire embassy.
Yes.
It was a very, very rare experience.
Yes. You have many interesting experiences on your overseas assignments.
Yes. But that one I mentioned because it was sort of like a social work.
Yes, I know.
If you will.
That's why I was saying. After you returned from Foreign Service, did you go to work for TRW?
I went to work for a small company called the J.D. Ray Company, first a small electronics company, and then from there went into what was then Raymond Wooldridge Corporation in 1953 or 4, and that became TRW. But that was in the very earliest stages of the formation of Raymond Wooldridge Company. I was very fortunate to be selected and hired by them and to develop with the company.
Yes, and your special assignment with the company was what?
Well, it was, the general field was in financial management. I at one time became the director of contracts for many years for what became Space Technology Laboratories out here for a number of years. But I evolved into a later assignment that was more of a government relations, public relations, customer relations, or a type of a jobs, and went to Washington for 10 years for TRW. While I was there, I did get onto a special loaned executive assignment to the National Alliance of Business.
Yes, and you say a special loaned executive position. Yes. Describe that.
Well, the National Alliance of Business is a nonprofit organization that is focused on getting the government and private industry to work together on the hardcore unemployment problem in this country. And the president each year, I should say every few years, maybe each new president, selects and asks and gets one of the chief executive officers of the larger corporations in the country to become the chairman of the National Alliance of Business. And he in turn brings in a small staff, and he brought in Lloyd Hand from TRW, who was the senior vice president of TRW, to be the president of the National Alliance of Business. And I was the senior vice president there for business management at the National Alliance of Business. I was there for about 3 years immediately before I came back to California. And it was a very, very exciting and very challenging and intriguing experience, because we were working with how do you better handle this unemployment problem in this country. And you're working with all the different racial elements that are involved, and with the White House staff, with the top executives of the board of the National Alliance of Business from large corporations, and social leaders like Benjamin Hook and Coretta King were on the board and so forth. And so this was quite a whole new exposure, if you will, of trying to work a problem and taking part in this to evolve a new approach. And to see that these people do apply their thinking and do discuss and try to resolve and solve problems and come up with ideas. A board meeting just wasn't, how do you do, let's have some coffee sort of a thing. The board meetings were held in the White House, but came up with the idea of, instead of having the government providing all these jobs for the unemployed, of having private industry step up to and taking a commitment, if you will, to help train and unemployed, unskilled people in areas where they needed these skills, and to get them hopefully into the private sector, into private business, and hopefully on a long-term basis becoming constructive private citizens instead of those just working on jobs created by the government to have jobs. And so that was the main thrust while I was there, was in the direction of trying to accomplish that. And the legislation did get through, and that program did get underway while I was under there.
So that really TRW paid your salary to work in this public joint program.
That's correct.
Yes.
And the chairman of the board put in a significant amount of his time as the chairman in pulling together and getting new leaders, CEOs of other companies to join the board, and that led the National Alliance of Business into strengthen and create a structure throughout the country of what became known as private industry councils to implement this concept at the local levels.
Did they sponsor some programs for children at all? Because I heard you make reference to some of the agencies that were helped. I didn't know it was under that or not.
Are you talking about the programs of the hardcore employment programs that were...
Yes.
Oh, yes. That was focused on younger people, primarily on younger people, yes. Either kids that had not gotten an adequate education or had dropped out of school and needed to get some skills and training. Yes, it was focused on the, if you will, the younger structure of the society, to try to get them turned around to become constructive, private job people of private jobs earning money and developing into to long-term citizens on a more normal basis, you might say.
Yes.
And so there were with many, many different agencies throughout the Los Angeles area here. I became aware of this more closely because after being in Washington where this whole program was legislated, and then coming back here to live, TRW encouraged me to be on the Los Angeles Private Industry Council, so I was able to become a part of seeing what went on at a local level.
Yes.
In comparison with the concepts that had been created in Washington about how they thought this all ought to work.
Does the program still exist?
Yes, the program still exists.
And you haven't been associated with it for a while?
I have until a few years ago. I was on the Private Industry Council, I guess, about, 4 years or so.
Did individual agencies apply to them for funds or for services of certain kinds?
Yeah, individual agencies would put forth proposals of how they would train for specific skills and what their expected output would be in the way of trained employees and get funds from the Private Industry Council to carry out these job training programs. So there were many agencies that were, yes, funded, and they had to meet criteria in order to get the funds and in order to compete again each year in the round of competition as to the effectiveness of their programs.
So in many ways you've been very effective in getting business or industry involved in human services.
Yeah, I happen to believe that that is essential in this country if there's to be adequate, real progress as well as more adequate services. And I think private industry is more and more embracing that concept as the way in which we can best tackle many of our social problems. In some ways, I think industry could do much more in maybe helping to embrace how to improve the educational system and contribute to through instructors, equipment, and all sorts of things, as some companies do right now, in improving the educational system in the country. But I think the idea of government-industry partnership in addressing issues of environmental problems and pollution, of social problems and homelessness and things of this sort, I think that day is here and will continue more and more so to be critical to the future of our society.
You were influential in getting TRW to become interested in the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California and doing some things for them. Would you describe some of this?
Well, that just happens to ring the very bell that I was just hitting. I heard that the USC School of Social Work was contemplating the establishment of an industrial social work program, which was to be focused on training certain of your graduates to be ready to work in industry and in private business And this is a concept that just was totally, for the most business world, completely unintelligible. What would a social worker be doing, getting trained to work in industry? And I also became aware that I'd sort of been going around being sort of like in the closet as a social worker, and that this would give me a more full embrace of social work in getting associated with the USC program. And since I was invited to join that industrial social work board with TRW's concurrence to put in a limited amount of time, and their understanding that they were supporting, as a company, having industry work with community to improve the community, they endorsed this kind of effort. And so that's how I went into the program of industrial social work at USC, which turned out to be very stimulating and very satisfying kind of an experience. And I think the program got well launched. Francis Feldman was the director of the program at the beginning, when it's from the stages and on for some time. And I don't know, I felt I made a good contribution.
Yes. And in addition to that, haven't you served on one of the boards at the university?
Well, the dean of the School of Social Work, after I'd been on the industrial social work side of things, that as one element or one project of the school, the dean of the School of Social Work invited me to join as his board of advisors. And so I've served on the board of advisors for 3 or 4 years.
Yes. Now, what years were those?
1980. I'd say 85 to about 89.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still a member, but I haven't been active since I retired. I've been roaming the world and haven't been here, and I have to address that question about with whether it's time maybe for me to find and help them locate another executive that could be as active as I was, if I'm going to continue to roam around.
Right. Is there anything else in your experience you'd like to comment on?
Well, I don't know. That's a wide open question.
Had a long career.
I've had a varied career, very, I think unusually so. I haven't gotten in as a lawyer and been a lawyer doing certain kind of legal work all my life. I've had a wide range. And I think at my time in Washington, where I was in government relations for TRW, which was this job was created, and I was the first one in it back in 1970, to focus on government policy and including where businesses would be expected or should fit in or contribute and this sort of thing. I found that my experiences in being perceptive of people and a certain awareness that is hard for me to describe, but that I have, was very valuable in working in some of the councils and committees I was on in Washington, D.C., and including mixed, when you get into the mixture of bringing government and industry executives together on a council to work on a problem, sometimes that's very difficult. And I found the insights that I had acquired through my experience at the home, as well as in some of the what I'll call social related work, was invaluable in my work at TRW. And I think it was because of that particular characteristic that I was looked upon as the right type of person for the job, and it helped a lot.
Yes.
In that way.
You kept friends with social workers through your life, haven't you?
Yes, you happen to be a social worker.
Yes.
John Milner, I guess you were the not the first real-life social worker, but the first real-life social worker that I really felt I had some time with. I knew Maria St. John at McKinley Home, but I guess our contact at Camp McStrauss when I was the counselor, and you would come in periodically along with the, I believe you call them caseworkers and advisors, was the start of a long, both professional and social friendship, which, of course, has meant a lot to me. I guess I never really understood social work until I got more exposed to it with you, and became aware of that while at Camp McStrauss. I still think, incidentally, that social work is not very well understood in the private industry arena. Some executives beginning to understand and appreciate more and move in and embrace wholeheartedly the idea of government-industry partnership. But I think that there's a ways to go in clarifying and helping others to see that there is indeed commonality in many ways of purpose, long-term objective from the viewpoint of the society.
Responsibilities are mutual.
Yes.
Yes.
More and more companies, are doing counseling, employee counseling, originally for drugs and alcohol, and now into broader brush programs. And indeed, TRW took on 2 of the interns from your industrial social work program. Obviously, I was a catalyst to help both parties become aware of the other. And indeed, hired 1 or 2 of your graduates in the field of industrial social work to work at TRW. But it took some doing for them to, at first, to get people to understand that there was a connection, that this wasn't some artificial merging of 2 disinterested parties, but that there was a connection. And I think there's going to take time, but I think that it's definitely moving in the right direction, that the top leadership of private industry is more and more aware that there's not only a need, but probably a responsibility part of business to step up to what I'll call their role in this partnership of solving and addressing the social issues.
Good. Donald, thank you for the interview. Maybe we'd like to add something a little later. Can.
Well, of course, all sorts of names fly through my head, but about the Lisa McBrooms and the Bob Roberts and so forth, but I realize this is not an endless bull session we're trying to have here, and I am hopefully not being too verbose.
Excellent.